Okay, so we are now moving on to protocols for diagnostic studies. So we talked about CSRs before. This session we're going to talk about writing protocols. We're going to talk about a bunch of different things today. We'll talk about the sample collection process, delinking, sample handling. We're also going to differentiate between the requirements of a traditional pharma protocol and diagnostics protocol, identify the elements required for each of the three main types of different protocols that we typically see in IVD studies, and we'll describe the required regulatory documents, including informed consent and when they are required. In terms of writing style, we discussed this earlier, so I'm not really going to go into too much detail, but as you know, we have a lot of different types of people that review our documents. So when we talked about the CSRs, we talked mostly about regulatory review and a little bit about internal review. As you know, protocols have a very different audience, or some different audiences, I should say. They're looked at much more closely by IRBs or independent ethics committees if you're doing global studies. Your CROs and your site personnel might have a lot more input into your protocol than they would in your CSR. You're obviously going to have internal reviewers as well as internal contributors. We have to think really about the protocols written for a very different end user, right? The protocol is primarily written for the site to use as their guideline for what needs to be completed. So it's very important that we think about how the protocol is written. And much like the CSR with any regulatory document, for any well-written document that you're going to submit for any kind of regulatory review should be written so that everybody has the same takeaway message. Now, with a protocol, you have a lot of different reviewers. You have site personnel. Some of them are doctors, some of them are nurses, some of them have other backgrounds, pharmacists, for instance. But most of those people have some kind of scientific or medical background. So your IRBs are very varied in terms of the scientific background of the people involved there. So we have to keep that in mind when we're writing a protocol, as well as an informed consent, which we typically write hand in hand. Your regulatory review is very different. Again, it's going to go to CDRH and or some other of the regulatory divisions at FDA, at least, if it's a combination product or something of that nature. So we talked again previously about writing style. It's same information. One of the things that's really important to know about regulatory documents is you're going to use the same principles no matter what you're writing. You want to use terminology that's familiar to your audience. With a protocol, you have a very varied audience, so you really have to think about that. You always want to write to inform rather than impress. And again, formatting and use of consistent styles is just as important as your content. You want to use a template. I have actually included a template for the protocol, which hopefully you'll find useful if you don't have one. This is a template that I've used for pharma studies. We have instructional text, which here you'll see in green, and it's italicized. I don't recommend italics at all, ever in a regulatory document, but I do like it as instructional text in templates because since I don't ever want to see italics in a regulatory document, whenever I see italics, I know that it's instructional text in any documents that I've created because I've typically created the template for it. So you'll have instructional text, and this particular protocol has sample or optional text, suggested standard text, and regular standard text. So again, you always want to use a template if you can. And again, you always want someone to review your work. That may reveal problems with flow, grammar, any other issues that you might have that you're not familiar with. Oh, and I do need to talk about active voice. The protocol, we talked about this in the previous slide, or the previous presentation for CSRs. With the protocol, we speak forward, but we always speak in the active voice. We don't want to use too many words to describe things. We want to talk in clear and concise language. So if you have too many words, that's sort of the passive voice. If you talk about, well, we should be kind of doing this in this way, or we recommend that you do this in this way, that's more passive. But if you say something specific like the reagent should be stored at 2 degrees centigrade, that is the active voice, and that's what we use for our protocol writing. So I think you're going to know the answer to quiz question 2. Write the protocol in active voice for enhanced readability and comprehension, the green check for true, and the red X for false, and that is definitely true. Thank you. All right, let's talk about protocol requirements from a regulatory perspective. So what does the FDA require for a clinical investigation? Basically, protocols are governed by 2 different overseeing bodies, if you will. There's the Title 21 Code of Federal Regulations, or CFR, and for diagnostics, it's 812. And if you're familiar with pharma, it's the same thing except it's 312. FDA is going to approve your IDE, and the main parts that you follow for your protocol are 21 CFR parts 812, 50, 54, and 56. We also follow GCPs for any protocol and ICH E6. So you have ICH and you have the CFRs that really are what you follow for your study conduct.